On a winter morning in 1951, a young man sat at the end of a row of strangers and looked at two lines printed on a card. One was plainly longer. He could see it the way you can see which of your own hands is bigger. Then, one by one, every person ahead of him studied the same card and calmly named the shorter line as the match. When his turn came, he paused. He looked again, and he agreed with them. This is conformity, captured in its purest laboratory form, and underneath it sits something darker that researchers came to call de-individuation, the quiet erasure of the self inside a group. Tonight, you'll watch a crowd do something stranger than change a person's mind. You'll watch it change what a person believes they saw with their own eyes, and then watch the person inside the crowd slowly disappear. Call it the vanishing. And once you've seen it, you'll start to recognize it in your own week. The young man at the end of the row was real. The strangers were not. They were actors, paid to lie, and the man who hired them was a psychologist named Solomon Asch. Asch had fled anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe as a child, arrived in America barely speaking the language, and grew up watching how ordinary people came to believe whatever those around them believed. He distrusted the easy story that humans are simply herd animals. He wanted to test the opposite, how independent a person could stay when everyone around them was confidently, visibly wrong. So in 1951, at Swarthmore College, he built the simplest trap imaginable. He gathered 50 male students one at a time into rooms full of his actors. He showed each of them a single line, then 3 comparison lines, and asked which one matched. He chose the task precisely because the answer was so obvious that a person sitting alone got it right more than 99 times out of 100. Asch was not testing eyesight. He was testing whether a room full of calm, agreeing strangers could make you doubt your own. Here is what the calm strangers could do. Across the rigged rounds, the actors looked at the long line and named the short one. Unanimous, certain, completely unbothered. And the real participants began to crack. On roughly 37% of those rounds, they abandoned the evidence of their own eyes and repeated the group's wrong answer. 3/4 of them did it at least once. Watch what that looked like inside the room. A man leans toward the card, squints, opens his mouth, stops. He glances down the row at the others, who all seem so untroubled. He shifts in his seat, and then, quietly, almost apologetically, he calls the short line the long one, and looks faintly relieved to have said it. Afterward, Asch asked them why. Most of them knew. They had seen the correct answer and spoken the wrong one anyway, because being the single dissenting voice in a unanimous room felt unbearable. Now, the darker detail. Alone, with no audience, those same people were almost incapable of error. Fewer than 1 in 100 got it wrong. The lines had not changed. Their eyes had not changed, only the room had changed, and that room had a precise weak point. When Asch planted just one other person who answered honestly, a single ally breaking the wall of agreement, conformity collapsed from about 1/3 of responses down to roughly 5%. One voice, not a majority, not an argument, not new evidence. The mere existence of one other human willing to say what they plainly saw was enough to hand everyone else their eyes back. And it ran the other way too. Asch varied the size of his fake majority and found that a single actor barely moved anyone. People conformed on only about 3% of trials. 2 actors pushed it to roughly 13%, but 3 actors produced almost the full effect, around 32%. And from there, adding more bodies changed almost nothing. A crowd of 15 was no more persuasive than a crowd of 3, which tells you something uncomfortable. The crowd's power was never really in its numbers and never in its reasons. It lived almost entirely in its appearance of being whole. 3 strangers who agree can bend you nearly as hard as 30. What breaks the spell is not a bigger opposition. It is a single crack in the unanimity. If a unanimous group can rewrite what you see, a question follows that the next generation of researchers could not leave alone. What else does the group rewrite? In 1952, 3 psychologists, Leon Festinger, Albert Pepitone, and Theodore Newcomb, gave the answer a name: de-individuation, the state in which a person stops being treated as an individual and, more frighteningly, stops experiencing themselves as one. Their own study was quietly chilling. They put students in groups and had them speak about their own parents, and when the students believed their comments could not be traced back to any one of them, something loosened. They said harsher, more hostile things about their mothers and fathers than they otherwise would. And afterward, asked who had said what, they could barely remember. The words had come out of a group, not a person. Submerged in the crowd, the inner observer, the part of you that watches you and keeps the receipt, had gone silent. In 1969, the psychologist Philip Zimbardo turned that idea into something he could measure. He brought women into his laboratory and instructed them to deliver electric shocks to another person. Half wore name tags and their own clothes. The other half he dressed in bulky coats and hoods that hid their faces, erased their names, and made them interchangeable. The hooded, nameless women held the shock button down roughly twice as long as the women who could be seen. Same instructions, same victim. The only thing he removed was the face. And with the face went the break. It is not only the laboratory. On Halloween night in 1976, Ed Diener and his colleagues quietly rigged the doorsteps of an entire town. Children arrived for candy and were told politely to take a single piece. When the adult at the door asked each child their name and where they lived, almost none of them cheated, about 7 in 100. But when the children came in a mob, masked, unnamed, their responsibility blurred among the group, the number detonated. More than 57% of them reached back into the bowl and took what was not theirs. Same children, same candy. The mask did the rest. And at the very far end of this research stands Leon Mann, who in 1981 went searching through old newspaper archives for the cruelest version of the pattern. He found 21 cases in which a desperate person stood high on a ledge, a bridge, or a tower while a crowd gathered below. In nearly half of them, 10 cases, the crowd did not fall silent and did not plead. It jeered. It urged the person on. And the jeering clustered exactly where the vanishing predicts it should, in large crowds under the cover of darkness, across a great height between the watchers and the watched. Numbers, anonymity, distance. The further a crowd drifted from being seen as individuals, the more monstrous it permitted itself to become. Here is where almost everyone misreads all of this. The popular version says humans are sheep, the crowd switches off your conscience, and a mob turns ordinary people into monsters. But that is not quite what the data shows, and the truth is sharper and more specific. In Asch's rooms, most responses were not conformist at all. People resisted the wrong answer roughly 2/3 of the time, and a full quarter of them never gave in even once. Asch himself was less alarmed by the conformity than struck by the independence that survived under such pressure. And the modern reckoning cuts deeper still. Later reviews of de-individuation found that anonymity does not simply unleash some savage inner animal waiting under the skin. People in a crowd do not become mindless. They become hyper-attuned to the particular norms of that particular crowd. You do not lose your conscience in a group. You trade it for the group's. The crowd does not delete the rule follower inside you. It only changes which rules you are following and then makes sure no one is watching you follow them. Now, look at your own week. The meeting where you saw the flaw in the plan, felt the objection rise in your chest, glanced around the table at all those nodding heads, and let it go. The group chat that turned on someone where you didn't type the cruel line yourself, but you didn't type the kind one either. The joke you laughed at because the room was already laughing. The opinion you discovered you held only after you learned which opinion was safe to have out loud. You were not weak. You were doing exactly what 50 students at Swarthmore did, what the children behind the masks did. You were reading the room and quietly editing yourself to match it. You did this, probably this week. You simply called it getting along. That is the strangest part of the vanishing. It never feels like surrender. It feels like agreement. The crowd does not have to break you or argue with you or even threaten you. It only has to be there and seem certain and let your own hunger to belong do the rest. Asch proved that a single honest voice can give an entire room back its eyes. The unbearable question is the one he left hanging in the air. In the rooms you sat in this week, when the group looked at the short line and called it long, were you ever that one voice? Or were you just another face in the row?